Milling Through History presents the Notorious Peggy Shippen. When it comes to the American Revolution, there are quite a few figures who stand out. However, one whose notoriety, if not infamy, is well known is of course that of Benedict Arnold. But attached to him is another name, one for which undeniably lives an even greater infamy when it comes to American society, and that is Peggy Shippen. This is a woman who goes down in history as being the great influential force which forced an American hero to become a traitor, switching sides and effectively ruining his entire name and reputation within his own home country. Peggy Shippen was born July the 11th, 1760, and was the youngest daughter to Edward Shippen IV and Margaret Frances. Despite having two younger brothers who died in their infancy, she was always seen as the baby of the family and the family's darling. Now, her education was heavily involved with music, needlework, drawing, but uniquely also the study of politics. And due to that study, when it came to looking up to her father as an influential role model, he saw to it that she learned about politics, finance, and the factors which led to the American Revolution. This is rather unique in 18th century society, as that meant that unlike most women of her time, Peggy Shippen was well aware of everything going on in the war, and therefore had a very well-developed opinion about it. Now, the Shippen family lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and had a rather peculiar position during the war. The family had been greatly divided, and as such, quite a few were loyalists and quite a few were patriots. Now, for Edward Shippen IV, most people within the city viewed him in a different light than he viewed himself. He believed he was neutral, while all of his contemporaries believed that he was actually a covert Tory. This particular thought was supported following the British capture of Philadelphia in September 1777, mainly because the Shippen family was known for holding social gatherings at their home, and a frequent guest who was found there was that of Major John Andre, who was an aide to General William Howe, commanding officer of the British forces. Now, following the evacuation of Philadelphia in June of 1778, both Major Andre and Peggy Shippen would remain close by writing letters to each other. It is believed that had the British not left, maybe Andre would have married Shippen instead of Arnold. But Benedict Arnold, upon arriving in Philadelphia, became the military commander of the city, and he would meet Peggy Shippen sometime in the latter half of 1778. It may have been through one of the social gatherings that the family was known to give, but it's uncertain. What is known is that it did not take long for him to want to marry her, and after a great deal of hesitation, Edward Shippen IV agreed to the marriage, and so the two were wed on April the 8th, 1779. Now, it is believed that Peggy Shippen had a great deal of influence in getting Benedict Arnold to join the British cause during their courtship and immediately following their marriage. Arnold was disgruntled with the Continental Congress, who had oftentimes passed him over for promotion and would view his enemies as being the true heroes for events that he was taken part of. And so initial contact was made between Benedict Arnold and the British, and it was believed it was initiated through a Tory by the name of Joseph Stansbury. Now, Peggy would continue to write her letters to Major John Andre, and coded inside of these letters were messages from Benedict Arnold written sometimes within the actual wording of the letter or through invisible ink. Now, at the behest of the British, Arnold was advised to take command of the station at West Point, which had been holding the British from being able to sail their fleet up and down the Hudson River. And once he took command, he could then put steps forward to get West Point to surrender to the British Army. Arnold took command of West Point, and on September the 21st, 1780, he would pass along documents and maps to Major Andre. 2 days later, Andre, while trying to get back to British lines, was captured, and it took another 2 days before word of this got back to Benedict Arnold. Now, for Arnold, he became in an immediate state of panic. Part of the whole plan of passing along these documents was to get the British to show up and arrive, capture West Point, at the same time as General Washington was making an inspection of the fortification. This would allow them to not only capture a vital strategic military point, but also one of the most important men in the American Revolution. Now, realizing he needed to make an escape, Peggy Shippen would feign a fit of hysteria, believing that Arnold was in danger and that her child was in danger and she needed the help of George Washington. Now, by doing so, this began to cast a wide spread of doubt as to whether or not she herself was involved with Arnold's treachery. However, it is unique to note that it was during her trip from West Point back to Philadelphia that it is believed she possibly had confessed to Theodosia Prevost, who would later become the wife of Aaron Burr, her own specific role when it came to being part of Arnold's treachery. After returning to Philadelphia, however, Peggy would continue to profess her innocence and lack of knowledge as to where Arnold was. Now, authorities would be investigating Arnold's treachery, and in doing so, they found a letter from Major Andre to Peggy, which served as evidence that she was somehow involved in the treason itself. In November of 1780, Peggy Shippen was banished from Philadelphia by the Supreme Executive Council of Pennsylvania, and, as further insult, she would have to be escorted from the city limits and out of the state by her father, who would take her to the Hudson River, where she boarded a boat for New York. After rejoining her husband and returning to London on January 22nd, 1782, Peggy Shippen was warmly welcomed to English society, along with her husband. She was awarded by Queen Charlotte with an annuity of £100 sterling, and £350 was given to her by George III for her meritorious services. In 1789, Peggy would return briefly to Philadelphia, but was treated rather coldly by the people, and by the time she and Benedict Arnold left the New World in December of 1791, mobs of people were coming to their home and protesting outside of it, calling them traitors. Benedict Arnold would pass away in 1801, leaving behind a large amount of debt. Peggy was then forced to sell almost everything she had, from home to jewelry to clothing, just to pay off all of these debts. 3 years later, in 1804, Peggy Shippen died reportedly from cancer and was buried at St. Mary's Church in Battersea on August 25th, 1804. For more information, please consider these suggested titles. Be sure to click on the left-hand side of the screen to subscribe to our show, and on the right-hand side for our latest episode. And we will see you again for the next episode of Milling Through History.